around the world, in places as unremarkable as office buildings and as remote as oceanic trenches, systems came online. Satellites that appeared to be weather monitors began to shift their orbits with millimeter precision, forming patterns invisible to outside observers. In dry docks hidden inside asteroid belts and gas giant atmospheres, ships that existed on no registry began to power up their cores. Not with noise, not with urgency, with patience. On the surface of Earth, nothing changed. Cities breathed their ordinary breath. Morning traffic moved through ordinary streets. Children went to school. Someone bought coffee. Someone argued about the weather. Humanity, in its vast and unknowing majority, went about the business of being alive, with no idea that the stars had just issued a death sentence against their world. The officers in the underground chamber liked it that way. General Alara Vassan stood before the main display and studied the galaxy's greatest military force, 9,000 ships in perfect formation, already moving toward Earth, already certain of the outcome. She did not smile. She did not flinch. She said 6 words. Phase 1 is complete. Begin Phase 2. In the council chamber, the silence had long since given way to something approaching celebration. Days had passed. Earth had not responded to the message. No peace envoys had been dispatched. No emergency transmissions had flooded council frequencies with desperate negotiation offers. The blue planet simply continued its slow rotation, serene and unresponsive, as though the message had never arrived. The council interpreted this in the only way their history had prepared them to. They are paralyzed with fear, one leader said, and around the chamber, quiet laughter rippled outward like a comfortable wave. Primitive worlds always react this way, said another. The mind cannot immediately process the concept of its own annihilation. Vilecorn allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. He leaned back in his seat and watched the holographic Earth tone in the light. He had seen this before, dozens of times across his long service. A world received the Council's ultimatum. A world went quiet. And then, inevitably, a world submitted. Pride was the first casualty of power. Silence was merely pride fighting its final battle. Give them time, he said. Fear always finds its voice. What the Council could not see, what their most powerful sensor arrays could not detect, what their deepest intelligence networks had entirely failed to map, was the activity happening in the dark. Human ships moved without lights. They generated no heat signatures readable by Council technology. They emitted no radio frequencies, no navigational pings, no energy trails. They existed as shadows among shadows, slipping through deep space in formation so disciplined they might have been mistaken for natural phenomena. The oldest of these vessels had been in development for 30 years. Some had been constructed in secret over multiple generations of engineers, the knowledge passed down through classified programs with no official names. They were not beautiful by the standards of galactic engineering. They were not elegant or luminous or vast. They were efficient in the terrifying, utilitarian way that things built for a single, serious purpose tend to be. Their hulls absorbed light. Their cores ran cold. Their weapons slept. Back on Earth's surface, the ordinary world continued. Children, coffee, arguments about weather, and deep beneath it, the underground chambers hummed with quiet, focused work. No speeches were made. No flags were raised. Officers ate working meals at their stations and spoke in the clipped, efficient shorthand of people who had rehearsed for precisely this moment. When the Council sent a second message, "This is your final warning," Earth let it pass into silence as well. In the Council chamber, this was taken as confirmation. The fleet, already moving, was ordered to accelerate. 9,000 ships burned bright across space, their engines blazing like a second sun, their formations perfect and proud. Council commanders wanted the approach to be seen. They wanted the galaxy to witness what happened to worlds that refused to bend. They were not thinking about what the darkness might be hiding. They should have been. The alien fleet was magnificent by any standard. Centuries of engineering, millennia of accumulated power, the combined resources of hundreds of civilizations, all of it expressed in those 9,000 ships moving like a vast, shining wall through the black. Their formations shifted in complex, practice patterns. Their weapon systems were charged and ready. Their commanders were experienced, decorated, and completely certain of what was about to happen. What was about to happen, they believed, was a demonstration, a brief, efficient display of overwhelming force, after which a small blue world would finally understand its place in the order of things. There would be a message of surrender. There would be terms. There would be the quiet, dignified surrender of a species that had spent too long believing its isolation was strength. The commanders lowered their defense screens. There was nothing out here to defend against. Their sensor arrays showed empty space ahead, no enemy formations, no weapon platforms, no signs of any military response whatsoever. Some commanders grew so relaxed they allowed their crews to stand down from combat readiness. What none of them could see was that they were being watched. Beyond the edge of their sensor range, human vessels drifted in the dark. They had been there for days, positioned with mathematical precision at exactly the coordinates that Council fleet movements analyzed, predicted, and mapped over years of careful intelligence work would require. They watched every ship, tracked every formation shift, measured every power signature. They did not move. They did not speak. They waited. In the underground command room on Earth, General Vasson stood before a display that showed the entire alien fleet as a constellation of small green points moving steadily inward. Around her, officers sat at their stations with a particular stillness of people who have moved beyond nervousness into something cleaner and more absolute. One of her officers looked up. "They've crossed the threshold, General." Vasson studied the screen for a long moment. The green points continued their advance, bright and confident and utterly unaware. "They crossed the line," she said, not with anger, with the quiet certainty of someone closing a mathematical proof. "Send the command." No speech accompanied it, no declaration of war, no final ultimatum, no dramatic transmission designed for the history archives. Just a signal, compact, encrypted, traveling at light speed toward positions in deep space where human ships waited in the dark. The signal arrived, and the dark came alive. The alien fleet commanders had time for exactly one moment of confusion before their world stopped making sense. It began with the sensors. Contact. A communications officer began, and then stopped because a display in front of her simply went blank. Not error messages, not static, blank, as though the universe beyond the hull had ceased to exist. Then navigation failed, then communications between ships, then weapons. The failures cascaded through each vessel's systems with a speed that seemed almost casual, as though something enormous and patient had been waiting for exactly the right moment to simply reach out and turn things off. Commanders shouted orders. Backup systems were activated. Emergency protocols that had never failed in 10,000 years of galactic warfare were engaged, and then those failed too, quietly and completely, like candles being pinched out one by one. "Find the enemy," one captain screamed. "Put them on screen." There was nothing on screen. Human ships did not appear as targets. They generated no heat that could be tracked, no energy that could be sensed. They moved through the alien fleet like currents through water, precise and purposeful, and from the perspective of every Council sensor array, they simply did not exist. The second wave arrived before the fleet had fully comprehended the first. Entire sections went dark simultaneously, not sections of any single ship, but sections of the fleet itself, blocks of vessels stripped of power in coordinated pulses that spoke of a targeting intelligence far beyond anything the Council strategists had modeled. Power cores shut down. Shields collapsed. Gravity failed aboard hundreds of ships, and crews found themselves floating helplessly through darkened corridors, unable to reach their stations, unable to communicate, unable to understand what was happening to them. Still, there were no explosions, no missiles, no energy beams, no visible weapons of any kind. The silence was the most frightening thing. An enemy you could see could be fought. An enemy you could hear could be tracked. But this methodical, invisible, polite dismantling of the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever assembled. This was something no one had prepared for. In the underground command room on Earth, General Vasson watched it unfold on her display with the focused attention of someone reading a document they have read many times before. "How are we doing?" she asked. 92% of primary fleet disabled, her officer replied. 0 casualties on our side. Council casualties, He paused, checking the data. Also near 0. Their crews are incapacitated, not harmed. Vasson gave a small nod. This had been precise. It had been measured, but the precision was over now. The measurement was complete. "Final phase," she said quietly. General, the Council is broadcasting surrender signals. Final phase, she repeated, and her voice was gentle and absolute. She picked up a small device, looked at it for a moment, not with pleasure, not with hesitation, simply with a recognition of someone completing a task, and pressed it. In deep space, human weapons change mode. They had been designed to disable. Now they were designed to end, and one by one, with a thoroughness that was somehow more terrifying than anger could ever produce, the ships of the Galaxy Council's greatest fleet simply ceased to exist. No debris drifted outward in expanding clouds. No emergency pods streaked away through the dark. The vessels vanished as cleanly as words erased from a page, leaving nothing behind but the same empty space that had been there before them. 9,000 ships. Gone. Minutes. Aboard the Council station, every screen showing the fleet went dark at the same moment. The silence that followed was different from any silence the chamber had held before. This was not the silence of deliberation or dignity. It was a silence of people who had just watched the ground disappear from beneath their feet. Then a human message appeared. It reached every screen in the station simultaneously, in every language spoken by every species represented in the chamber. The voice was calm, not cold, not triumphant, simply calm, in the way that absolute certainty tends to be calm. You were warned, it said. You chose threat over respect. Nothing followed. No demands. No terms of surrender. No offer of negotiation. The message ended, and silence returned. And in that silence the Council finally understood something they had never encountered before in all their millennia of power. They were not facing a world that wanted to win. They were facing a world that had already won, had known it would win, and felt no particular need to make a performance of it. The Council station systems began to fail before anyone understood what was happening. It was not dramatic. There were no alarms, no cascading explosions, no hull breaches. The lights dimmed. Climate control shifted almost imperceptibly. The enormous displays that lined the chamber walls flickered once, twice, and then showed only a single text line, repeated in every language. All military and control systems disabled. Do not resist. An advisor pressed himself against the wall of the chamber and whispered, as though speaking aloud might make it worse. Human systems are inside our networks. They've been there for... He checked his display. Checked it again. 4 years. Years. Someone repeated, and the word moved through the chamber like a contagion, each species processing it in their own way, each reaching the same terrible conclusion. Humans had not been unprepared. Humans had been studying them. While the Council had been scanning Earth for military assets it could identify and quantify, human intelligence had been threading itself through every Council system, mapping every network, learning the precise architecture of galactic power, not to use it, but to dismantle it cleanly and completely at the moment of their choosing. Desperate Council members began transmitting everything they had. Apologies, offers of alliance, promises of trade rights, territorial concessions, seats of honor at the Council table. They sent histories of their civilizations, declarations of mutual respect, everything their diplomatic traditions had taught them to offer when facing an adversary of superior power. None of it was answered. Human forces did not storm the station. No soldiers moved through its corridors. No commanders arrived to accept surrender and impose terms. The station simply sat in space, isolated and powerless, its communication arrays unable to reach anyone, its docking bays sealed from the outside, its great engines cold and silent. One by one, the Council ships that had remained behind lost power. Escape routes closed with the unhurried precision of something following a pre-written script. The lights in the chamber grew dimmer. The translation arrays, the systems that allowed hundreds of species to speak and hear each other, fell silent. For the first time in galactic history, the beings who govern the stars found themselves sitting in the dark, unable to speak to one another, able only to sit with what they had done. Varelkorn sat very still in his seat. He was old enough to remember when the Council had been something else, something closer to what it had always claimed to be, a cooperative, a framework for peace between species who might otherwise destroy each other. He had watched it drift, decade by decade, into something harder and colder, something that had forgotten the difference between authority and domination. He thought about the message Earth had never sent, the apology that had never been required, the negotiation they had never asked for, He thought about a species that had been watching the galaxy's most powerful institution, watching it with clear eyes, and had simply chosen not to participate. He had called that refusal weakness. He closed his eyes. "We were never their problem," he said softly, to no one in a darkening room. "We made ourselves their problem, and they solved us." The station shook once, slightly, gently, as its final core system completed its shutdown sequence. Then the Galaxy Council chamber was dark. The silence spread outward from the station like a signal. Across the galaxy, command centers waited for orders that never arrived. Trade networks stalled. Military fleets, mid-journey toward their designated patrol zones, received no new instructions and returned home in careful, confused silence. Political systems that had operated for millennia under the assumption of council oversight found themselves, abruptly and completely, without a center. And then the human message came. It did not come through official council channels, because those channels no longer existed. It came through every frequency, every communication band, every method by which one civilization might speak to another. It reached frontier colonies and ancient homeworlds alike. It translated itself, automatically and perfectly, into every recorded language. The voice was not that of a general or a head of state. It was not dramatic. It did not sound like victory. It sounded, if anything, like someone making a reasonable point. "Humanity does not seek control," it said. "We do not rule the stars. We do not demand loyalty. We do not ask for tribute or territory or recognition." Images accompanied the words, not images of human warships or the disabled alien fleet, but images of Earth itself. A child running through autumn leaves, an old woman tending a garden in morning light, a crowded marketplace where every face showed the ordinary, irreplaceable texture of a life being lived. A scientist alone in a laboratory, bent over something small and complex, entirely absorbed. A harbor at dawn, boats setting out. Ordinary, overwhelmingly ordinary. We were silent, the voice continued, because silence was what we chose. We are not silent because we have nothing to say. We are silent because we believe that most things, in most circumstances, are better resolved without speaking. A pause. We prepared because peace must be defended, because there are those who interpret patience as weakness, and quiet as fear, and restraint as an inability to act. We have now demonstrated that none of these interpretations were accurate. Another pause, shorter this time. We harbor no resentment. We seek no ongoing conflict. We ask only that the civilizations of this galaxy develop the wisdom to distinguish between a world that cannot defend itself and a world that has chosen, until this moment, not to. The voice paused one final time, and when it spoke again, the words were not a threat. They were not even, precisely, a warning. They were simply a statement of fact, offered with a complete confidence of something that required no performance to be believed. Never threaten Earth. The signal ended, and across the galaxy, the lesson was received. On 8th, the morning after was exactly like any other morning. The sun rose at its appointed time over a planet that had no idea what it had just survived, and the cities woke, and people made coffee, and an argument broke out on a morning television program about something entirely unrelated to galactic geopolitics. Children went to school. Trains ran on schedule. Somewhere, probably, a dog chased a squirrel and failed, as dogs tend to do, to reckon with the fundamental optimism of that impulse. Deep below the surface, in the room that didn't exist, General Alara Vasson read a final report. She read it carefully, as she read everything, not because she expected surprises, but because she believed that the details of things deserve attention even after the things themselves were complete. All threats neutralized. It read, "No further risk detected. Galactic response, compliance. Human casualties, 0. She set the report aside. She looked at the screens, which now showed nothing more alarming than the slow, ordinary movement of stars. She thought, briefly, about the first day she had been brought to this room, young, skeptical, certain she was being told a story too large to be true. She thought about everything she had learned since then, everything humanity had quietly built in the spaces between the stars in the decades when no one was paying attention. She allowed herself a single, small, private smile. Then she closed the file, stood up, and walked out. Above the surface, the stars looked exactly as they always had, ancient and cold and impossibly distant, scattered across the dark without apparent order or meaning. But they were different now, in the way that things which have been tested are always different from things which have only been believed in. The galaxy had a new understanding, written not in treaties or proclamations, but in the permanent, unalterable record of what had happened in the dark. It would be discussed in council halls, new ones, presumably built slowly and carefully by species learning, perhaps for the first time, what governance without domination might look like. It would be taught in academies and debated by historians and analyzed by strategists for generations. They would all reach the same conclusion. Humanity had never boasted, had never threatened, had never issued ultimatums or drawn lines or rattled sabers in the cold light of space. When threatened, they had done nothing, conspicuously, deliberately, meaningfully nothing, until the moment came to act. And when that moment came, they had acted with such precision, such completeness, such utter absence of cruelty or waste or excess, that the action itself had carried a message more powerful than any words could have delivered. We were ready before you knew we existed. We could have done this at any time. We waited because we hoped you would be different. You were not. Now you will be. That was the message the galaxy received. Not from a transmission, not from a broadcast, from the shape of what had happened and the silence that followed it. Far from the center of galactic civilization, at the edge of a modest solar system, a small blue planet continued its orbit around its ordinary star, unremarkable in almost every way that could be measured, astonishing in every way that could not. And in the quiet between stars, something had changed forever, not with a declaration, not with a ceremony, not with the placement of any flag or the signing of any document, just with a silence that the galaxy had mistaken, once, for fear, and would never mistake again. The Galaxy Council chamber was never truly silent. Even in its quietest moments, the great hall hummed with the subtle vibrations of 1,000 systems, environmental controls, translation arrays, the soft pulse of energy flowing through walls built from materials older than most civilizations. But tonight, something had stilled even those mechanical whispers. Tonight, the chamber held a silence that felt almost alive. Hundreds of alien leaders sat in a wide circle, their forms ranging from the towering to the microscopic, from the luminous to the shadow dark. Some breathed gases that would kill their neighbors. Some communicated through frequencies no organic it could detect. Yet all of them, every species, every empire, every ancient dynasty represented in that hall, stared at the same thing, a small blue planet, suspended in holographic light at the center of the room. It rotated slowly, peacefully, wrapped in wisps of white cloud. Its oceans caught the chamber's ambient light and scattered it like scattered jewels. From this distance, from this perspective, it looked fragile. It looked insignificant. It was cold earth. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then an elder rose from his seat, a being of considerable age even by galactic standards, his skin like weathered stone, his eyes carrying the pale luminescence of someone who had watched empires rise and collapse like seasons. His name was Vialcorn, and he had served the Council for longer than most species in the room had possessed space travel. His voice, when it came, was calm, terribly, deliberately calm. "Humans are becoming a problem," he said. The words fell into the silence like stones dropped into still water. Around the chamber, postures shifted, antennae tilted, eyes, of every shape, color, and number, moved from the hologram to the elder and back again. Images bloomed in the air. Human ships, angular, compact, nothing like the elegant curves of council design, moving through space lanes they had never been authorized to enter. Human cities sprawling across a single world with the restless energy of something not yet finished growing. Human soldiers standing in formations, not with the rigid discipline of trained armies, but with something more unsettling. They stood without fear. They looked at the camera feeds they didn't know existed, and they simply stood there, as though daring the universe to try something. "They are not advanced," said a leader from the Valurian collective, her forearms folded across her chest. Her species had been spacefaring for 9,000 years. By any measurable standard, they remained primitive. "And yet," said another voice, deep and resonant, belonging to the hulking representative of the Ket Dominion, "they are stubborn." The Council did not like stubborn worlds. Earth had been given warnings before, politely worded at first, then increasingly firm. It had refused to join the Council's unified governance framework, citing something called sovereignty as though the concept still had meaning at this scale of civilization. Worse, human vessels had been detected operating in restricted zones, testing propulsion systems and scanning technologies that, by all rights, they should not yet possess. And they had never explained themselves, never apologized, never even acknowledged the warnings with more than bureaucratic silence. Vilecorn raised one ancient hand. "We will remind them," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of 10,000 years of galactic order, "exactly who controls the stars." The message was composed with care. Short sentences, clear language, no diplomatic softening, no room for misinterpretation. Submit to the authority of the Galaxy Council or face erasure. It was transmitted across space at the speed of light, wrapped in a carrier signal powerful enough to penetrate any interference. The finest communication technology the Council possessed, aimed at a single pale blue world. The message would arrive within hours. It arrived without fanfare. No alarms rang across Earth's surface. No emergency broadcasts interrupted evening programming. No presidents were pulled from sleep. The signal came in quietly, encrypted in a format that should have been unreadable to human technology, and it went exactly where it was meant to go. Deep beneath a mountain range that appeared on no public map, behind doors made of materials with no official name, inside a room that officially did not exist, the signal was received, decoded, and read in full. The chamber was small and cold. The kind of cold that comes not from poor heating but from deliberate design, environments kept at precise temperatures to keep human minds sharp and human emotions secondary. There were no windows. The only light came from screens, and the screens showed everything. 7 officers stood around a central display. They read the Council's message in complete silence. No one gasped. No one's hands trembled. One officer, a woman with gray-streaked hair and the kind of stillness that comes from having prepared for something for a very long time, read the message twice, then set it aside with the careful precision of someone who had just confirmed the suspicion they carried for years. She looked at her colleagues. "So," she said, her voice almost conversational, "they finally noticed us." The room didn't erupt into noise. There were no shouted commands, no scrambled emergency protocols. Instead, something quieter and far more deliberate happened. Officers moved to their stations. Fingers found keyboards they had rehearsed on for years. Files that had been sealed, some for decades, were opened one by one, their encryption dissolving like frost in morning light. Project names appeared on the screens. Silent Fleet, Black Horizon, Deep Shield,